Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWUS. We're on to Sunday, continuing on with the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. The streak continues, man. 4 straight winning days for me. Had a great Saturday. Went 3-0 in college basketball, 1-0 in NBA, 2-1 in the Chiefs game. My overhit in the Lions Commanders. So yeah, I am having an excellent little run here. 4 straight winning days and an excellent Saturday. Hopefully the positivity continues. We got 2 games, 2 great games. Let's get into it. I mean, is Cooper Rush worth 2.5 points? I would hope Quinn Ewers put up a decent stat line against Arizona State. If he didn't, we have a real problem.
You can say the same thing about Creighton. Okay, they had the one good game against Kansas at home.
When Toast talks about the kicking market, it's like some earth is flat shit. Andy, true or false, this is going to be a dog walking.
Dog walking. This is my dog walking of the day. I think it's going to be very ugly. Dog walking. I think this is going to be ugly.
Hey, get the sauce. First up, we got the Rams on the road in Philadelphia. Looks like the Eagles are laying 6.5 now. It was at 6. Most sportsbooks have moved it up to 6.5. I do still see a couple 6s out there. Total sending at 42 or mostly 42.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to the data, action seems to be coming in on the LA side. Over 60% of the tickets, about 65% of the money coming in on the Rams. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's start with some playoff trends, and the Eagles are 8-4 against the spread in their last 12 playoff games. So betting the Eagles in the playoffs has been profitable. However, they're just 3-6 against the spread in their last 9 playoff games as favorites. So it has not been profitable to bet the Eagles as favorites in the playoffs. Meanwhile, the Rams in their last 5 playoff games as underdogs, 4-1 against the spread, and that includes last week against Minnesota. So trends may be pointing towards a Rams bet here. Now, before we get into this one, we need to talk about the weather. We're looking at 98% chance of snow, 12-mile-an-hour winds. So we're going to see a weather game here. Winds north 10 to 15 miles an hour. Chance of snow 100%, 3 to 5 inches. So we are going to see Matt Stafford in the snow here. In case you're unfamiliar with the history, Stafford in the snow, 1-8 in his career. 1 win, 8 losses. In those 9 games, he completed just 54.6% of his passes, 14 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, a passer rating of 76. So Matt Stafford in the snow is not what you want to see if you're a Rams fan or you plan on betting the Rams here. But anyway, let's talk about the matchup. Let's match these 2 teams up on the field. We got the Rams offense against the Eagles defense here. Rams offensively, 15th in yards per play, 10th in success rate. The Eagles defense, 1st and 1st. So definite edge towards Philadelphia on this side of the ball. Rams also dealing with a couple injuries here. Blake Corum is not going to play in this game. Alaric Jackson is listed as questionable at left tackle. From what I'm reading, he's supposed to play here. He did miss Friday's practice, though. So that's a little concerning for the Rams. Their starting left tackle listed as questionable, did not practice on Friday. But the Eagles have a couple injuries themselves. Nakobe Dean just went down last week. He's not going to play in this game. And Brandon Graham, he's been out for a couple months now. So the Eagles defensive front missing a couple pieces as well. So do we think the Rams offense is able to run the ball on this Eagles defense? Well, you know the story with the Eagles defense. Since the bye week, they went absolutely nuts. Elite defensive numbers since week 5 when they had their bye week. But I pointed out last week, if you only isolate their games against top 10 offenses, the defensive numbers don't look nearly as good. 5.6 yards per play, 22 points per game compared to 4.5 yards per play, 12.1 points per game. So the Eagles defense elite since the bye week, but if you isolate just their games where they saw good offenses, it doesn't look quite as elite, and that includes a Week 12 game against the Rams. Rams were able to run the ball a little bit in that game. I mean, just 92 rushing yards in the game. They did average 5.1 yards per carry, 44.4% success rate per rush. So when they did hand the ball off, they were successful running the ball. They just didn't hand the ball off a whole lot in this one. And it was kind of the same story last week against Green Bay. The Packers didn't run the ball a whole lot, just 107 rush yards in the game. But when they did hand it off, they were finding some success. 4.3 yards per carry, success rate per rush over 41%. Those aren't terrible numbers. So maybe the Rams can run the ball in this Eagles defense. I mean, keep in mind, this Rams offensive line, since it got healthy about halfway through the year, they've done a great job creating space in the run game. They're 9th in adjusted line yards, 5th in run blocking grade, 11th in yards before contact. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that the Rams offensive line is about to go on the road into Philadelphia and just bulldoze the Eagles defensive front. I'm not crazy. I mean, the Eagles defensive front this year, 13th in adjusted line yards, 2nd in run defense grade, 5th in yards before contact. Also, the Rams tend to run more gap concept blocking schemes, 9th in frequency, plays directly into the strength of the Eagles defense. They're 4th in yards per carry allowed, 3rd in success rate per rush against gap concept blocking schemes. So no, I don't expect the Rams to just go in there, hand the ball off, and get 6 yards per carry. That's crazy. I'm just saying, don't be surprised if the Rams are able to find some success on the ground. In my opinion, the real question is right here. Matt Stafford trying to throw the ball in the snow against this Eagles defense. Since the bye week, we talked about it already. Eagles have some elite defensive numbers. They're allowing just 5.6 yards per pass attempt, 175 passing yards allowed per game, an average opponent pass rating of 78 since the bye week. So they've been elite against the pass since the bye week. They did see a lot of bad quarterbacks, but we cannot ignore what happened last week. I mean, Jordan Love, who had been struggling, to be fair, but Jordan Love on the road in Philadelphia could not do shit against this Eagles defense. 20 of 33, 212 yards through the air, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a 41.5 passer rating. That's disgusting. The Eagles had Jordan Love in prison. Now, here's where this matchup gets interesting. We just talked about how basically nobody was able to throw the ball in this Eagles defense since the bye week, right? Since week 5, no one's really had much success throwing the ball on this Eagles defense. Well, here's the thing. Matt Stafford's kind of the exception to that. Because in week 12 against the Eagles, he was 24-36, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, a 104 passer rating. Not that this is an explosive performance, but that's a good game. He played solid against this Eagles defense, so we can't say nobody was able to throw the ball in this Eagles defense in the second half of the year. Stafford actually did. Now, to be fair, that was at home in LA in perfect conditions. This is on the road in Philly in the playoffs in the snow. So it's a little bit different, but we do have to point out that Stafford did have success throwing the ball in this Eagles defense earlier in this season, and this is a Philadelphia defense that's running a lot more zone coverage recently. Since week 10, they're running zone coverage over 74% of the time, 5th most in the NFL in that span. That's good news for Matt Stafford because he has much better numbers against zone coverage, 11th in completion percentage, 18th in yards per attempt, 9th in passer rating against zone coverage, much better than his numbers against man. Also, the Eagles defense sits back in deep coverage a lot. They run a lot of cover 4 and a lot of cover 6, and I double check because you might be thinking, well, Kyle, they sit back in deep coverage because they always have a big lead. Well, I actually double check that, and I searched specifically that games were within a touchdown, so the Eagles were either up touchdown or less or trailing a touchdown or less, and they still run a ton of cover 6. In fact, they lead the NFL in cover 6 frequency, and in a touchdown or less game, they were like 7th in cover 4 frequency. So whether they have a big lead or not, the Eagles run a lot of these, a lot of cover 4, a lot of cover 6. More good news for Stafford because those deep coverages, Stafford's happy to take those underneath throws. Against cover 6 this season, he's 6th in completion percentage, 21st in yards per attempt, 17th in passer rating. Much better numbers than his overall stats this year. Against cover 4, kind of the same story here. 19th in completion percentage, 8th in yards per attempt, 14th in passer rating. So this is starting to look like it might be a decent matchup for Matt Stafford. Maybe that game in week 12 wasn't a fluke. Maybe he matches up well against this Eagles defense. Now, here's where it starts to get a little concerning for Matt Stafford. The Eagles pass rush. And you might be looking at the right side of this graphic saying, Kyle, I don't get it. They're 23rd in pressure rate, 13th in adjusted sack rate. That's fair. I will show you in a second that they've actually been a little better as of late. But look at the bottom left of this graphic. Matt Stafford is one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL under pressure. 27th in yards per pass attempt, 38th in passer rating, 35th in turnover-worthy play rate. So if Philadelphia is able to generate consistent pressure in this game, we should see Matt Stafford struggle. Well, good news. As I mentioned, the Eagles pass rush has been much better in the second half of the season. Since week 10, they're averaging 2.44 seconds to pressure, 7th best in the NFL. So the Eagles do have a top 10 pass rush. Maybe not one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, but it's certainly great. But most importantly, look at the top left of this graphic. Blitz rate, 26th. The Eagles are able to generate this pressure without sending extra rushers, and that is huge because Matt Stafford has significant splits in this department. Check this out. When blitzed this season, he's 6th in completion percentage, 7th in yards per attempt, 10th in pass rating, 26th in turnover-worthy throw rate. When not blitzed, 38th, 36th, 32nd, and 30th. So if you're able to generate pressure on Matt Stafford using only your front 4, the Rams are going to be in a situation here, and that's exactly what Philadelphia does. And check this out. This is interesting. So remember Stafford was struggling his last 3 games, the last 3 games that he played. Obviously, he didn't play the last game of the year. But Matt Stafford's last 3 starts against the 49ers, the Jets, and the Cardinals. Now, the Jets do blitz at a decent rate, But 49ers and Cardinals, they do not blitz. Look at Matt Stafford's numbers against defenses that don't blitz. They're pretty awful. In those 3 games, Matt Stafford's last 3 starts before the playoffs, 60.3% completions, 153 passing yards per game, an average pass rating of 76.8. Then he plays the Vikings, blitz-heavy Brian Flores defense, and Stafford's back to looking great again. Over 70% completions, 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, a passer rating over 117. And it actually gets even more interesting than that. Check it out. Let's take a look at the Vikings game specifically where he played well. On plays where he was blitzed, 12 of 18, 174 yards, 9.67 yards per pass attempt. When the Vikings did not blitz Stafford, 7 of 9, 35 yards, under 3.9 yards per pass attempt. The Eagles do not blitz a lot. They run a lot of cover 4, a lot of cover 6. Tell me we're not going to see Stafford hitting these little underneath throws all game. I'm not sure if the Rams are able to consistently move the chains with those throws. So as a whole on this side of the ball, I have to say I don't love this matchup for the Rams offense. I do think they will find some success running it a little bit. And Stafford's definitely going to connect on his short underneath throws, but I don't expect a ton of explosive plays here. I also really don't know what to expect in terms of Stafford in the snow. I don't want to overreact to the weather, but it's kind of tough to not see 1 and 8 in the snow. So as a whole, I'd say it's a pretty tough matchup for the Rams offense. I expect a very conservative game plan here from McVay. Now we get to the other side of the ball, and this is where things get a little more confusing. Obviously, you look at these graphics, things look great for Philadelphia. Huge edge on this side of the ball. 11th in yards per play, 13th in success rate against a Rams defense that's 26th and 25th. So clearly, Philadelphia's offense should have the big advantage here. I mean, we saw the Eagles running the ball on the Packers last week, 169 yards on the ground, 5 yards per carry. Success rate down at 33%, which isn't good, but they were able to run the ball in Green Bay. And that's a Packers defense that, heading into that Eagles game, they had been shutting the run down. In weeks 12 through 18, leading up to the Eagles game, they were allowing 3.36 yards per carry, just 71 rushing yards per game. Success rate at 30.4%. So the Eagles were still able to run the ball a little bit on Green Bay last week. Now they're going to see a Rams defense that's almost the complete opposite of Green Bay. Now they're going to see a Rams defensive front that's almost the complete opposite of Green Bay. There was a stretch there where the Rams were playing some good defense against the run. Week 7 through 11, 3.7 yards per carry allowed, under 98 rushing yards allowed per game. Success rate per rush under 30%. But since then, I mean, since week 12, they're allowing 5.4 yards per carry, over 134 rushing yards per game, 41.2% success rate per rush. And you want to know who started that? Saquon Barkley in week 12. He had 255 yards rushing in the game, 9.8 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. Now, to be fair, he had a 72-yard touchdown run at the end of the game there where he could have just slid down and ended the game. Instead, he ran it 72 yards for a touchdown. I remember that specifically because it killed my under. But still, he did whatever he wanted against this Rams defense. They had no answers for Saquon Barkley on the ground. And the battle on the line of scrimmage here is just so one-sided. The Eagles' offensive line, 20th in adjusted line yards, 6th in run blocking grade, 2nd in yards before contact. The Rams' defensive front, 24th, 14th, and 28th. And this is an Eagles' offensive line that's completely healthy. In fact, the entire Eagles' offense is completely healthy. So Philadelphia completely good to go on this side of the ball. Meanwhile, the Rams might be without their big man in the middle, Bobby Brown, the nose tackle. He's listed as questionable. He hasn't practiced all week. So the Rams might be missing Bobby Brown here. Also, their corner Witherspoon is listed as questionable. Not sure if he's going to play. They do have Kobe Durant, so it's not like they don't have anyone to replace him. Not super worried about the Witherspoon injury, but definitely don't want to be missing a piece on the defensive line against this Eagles offensive line. So before we get any deeper into this matchup, we know the Rams are going to have no choice but to load the box, because if they just keep 7 in the box, Saquon Barkley's going to go nuts. He's going to have 6 yards per carry. So the Rams are going to have to load the box to try to stop this Eagles run game, which means there should be plenty of opportunities for Jalen Hurts to make some throws. Now, obviously, the Rams pass rush is something we have to talk about. On the season, they're 14th in pressure rate, 19th in adjusted sack rate. They've been a little better as of late. They started off the season great, then got cold, and now they're actually heating up again. Jalen Hurts has really struggled handling pressure this year, 28th in pressure to sack rate, 33rd in yards per attempt, 29th in turnover-worthy play rate. Now, you give Jalen Hurts a clean pocket, 2nd in the NFL in yards per attempt, 3rd in passer rating. Just to give you an idea of how completely different the first round was for these two quarterbacks, Matt Stafford against the Vikings, 2.47 seconds before he threw the ball. Jalen Hurts, 4.25 seconds. Matt Stafford got the ball out quicker than any quarterback in the NFL in the first round. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts held onto the ball longer than any other quarterback in the wildcard round other than Josh Allen. So completely different quarterbacks we're talking about here. Maybe the Rams pass rush can be a factor. They were definitely a factor last week against the Vikings. Sam Darnold was pressured on 54% of his dropbacks last week, the most of any quarterback in the wild card round. Now, it's important to point out about this number here. The Vikings were unable to run the ball. Obviously, we don't expect that from the Eagles. And also, the Rams jumped out to a big lead. They knew Minnesota was throwing the ball. It's a lot easier to pressure the quarterback when you're up 21-0 and you know the quarterback's going to be throwing. So obviously the Rams pass rush was put in a pretty fortunate situation to have a big lead. They knew Sam Darnold was dropping back to pass, but still, they were definitely a factor. They were pressuring Sam Darnold early and often in that game. Also, this is a Rams defense that runs a lot of zone coverage, over 73% frequency, 7th most in the NFL. Jalen Hurts, significantly better numbers against man coverage this year. In fact, he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL in every metrics except turnover-worthy play rate against man. Against zone coverage, 18th in completion percentage, 17th in yards per attempt, 14th in passer rating. And as far as Jalen Hurts last week against Green Bay, I mean, he did have a passer rating over 111, so we can't say he played a bad game. But at the same time, I mean, 13 of 21, 131 yards, success rate per dropback under 35%. On a full season scale, that would be 32nd in the NFL, a success rate per dropback under 35%. So I don't know if we could really say Jalen Hurts had a good game either. And this is a Rams defense that looked absolutely elite last week against Minnesota. Held that explosive Vikings passing attack to 9 points, 3.8 yards per play, success rate under 42%, 77.6 passer rating. So the Rams defense may be coming into this game with some momentum after playing so well against the Vikings last week. I really don't know what to expect from Jalen Hurts throwing the ball. And it's not like we could look at the Week 12 game for reference. I mean, this doesn't really tell us anything either. 15 of 22, 179 yards, a touchdown, no picks, a 108 passer rating. I mean, he didn't really have to do anything. Saquon Barkley had like 450 yards on the ground. So we really don't know what Jalen Hurts would look like in this game if for whatever reason Saquon Barkley is unable to just completely rip the Rams defense apart on the ground. Not to mention, we can't forget about the weather here. So it might be poor weather. Who knows what Jalen Hurts is able to accomplish through the air. I do think the Eagles are going to be able to run the ball. The Rams are going to have to load the box up. I think Jalen Hurts will also be able to make some plays with his legs. So I do think the Eagles are able to move the ball on the ground here, which leads me to the bet. It's going to be Philly for me. I'm grabbing a -6. The Rams defense should really struggle to get off the field in this one. They're going to have to sell all the way out to try to slow down Saquon Barkley in the Eagles' run game. Should make play calling pretty easy for Kellen Moore. Obviously, we have to consider the weather. So I'm going to take the Eagles. I'm going to grab one of the -6s before they're all gone. I'm going to be on Philly. I also kind of want to bet, and I know everyone's going to hate this one, Matt Stafford over 19.5 completions. We talked about how the Eagles sit back and cover 4 and cover 6. Matt Stafford gets the ball out quickly. He's going to take those underneath throws. So I think Matt Stafford's going to get up and over 19.5 completions. But I like the Eagles. So Eagles -6, Matt Stafford over 19.5 completions, and I'm also looking at the over 42.5 next game. All right, time for what is very obviously the best game of the weekend here. Baltimore on the road in Buffalo. The Bills are catching 1 or 1.5, depending on your sports book. Bills opened up as short favorites. They are now short dogs. Total sitting at 51.5 across the board in this one. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action's coming in pretty split on this one. Just about 55% of the tickets, about 55% of the money coming in on Buffalo. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's start with some trends here, and the Ravens turning into an under team in the playoffs. In the last 7 Baltimore Ravens playoff games, they're 1-6 to the under. So betting the under in Baltimore playoff games has been very profitable, but on the Buffalo side, it's the exact opposite. In their last 8 playoff games, they're 6-2 to the over. In their last 18 home playoff games, their last 18 playoff games at home at Buffalo, they're 13-4-1 to the over. So Buffalo playoff games have all gone over. Baltimore playoff games have all gone under. As far as ATS trends, Baltimore's 4-2 against the spread in their last 6 playoff games, 8-1 against the spread in their last 9 road playoff games. Baltimore 8-1 against the spread in their last 9 road playoff games. Meanwhile, the Buffalo Bills just 4-7 against the spread in their last 11 playoff games. So if you're following trends, really don't know what to tell you on the total. There's trends for the over, trends for the under, but as far as a side, you'd probably be on Baltimore here. But we're not interested in the past. We're interested in this matchup right here. We'll start with the Ravens offense against the Bills defense, and obviously Baltimore has the edge on this side of the ball. Ravens probably the best offense in the NFL. First in yards per play, second in success rate. The Bills defense 18th and 18th. Obviously a good place to start here would be the Week 4 game. Buffalo goes on the road to Baltimore, get their asses beat 35-10. in that one. So the Ravens handled Buffalo earlier in the season, and the story was right here. Baltimore had 271 yards on the ground, 271 rushing yards in the game, just under 8 yards per carry, 50% success rate per rush. So that's what we need to figure out. Is Buffalo capable of fixing this? Are they able to stop the Ravens from running the ball all over them again? Well, good news if you're a Buffalo fan or you plan on betting the Bills here. Buffalo's done a much better job in that department as of late. In weeks 14 through 18, so the last 5 games of the regular season, Buffalo was allowing just 3.73 yards per carry, just 100.6 rushing yards allowed per game, under 38% success rate per rush. So down the stretch of the regular season, Buffalo was playing significantly better defense against the run, and that includes a game on the road at Ford Field against the Lions. They held Detroit to just 48 yards rushing in the game, 3.2 yards per carry, success rate per rush under 27%. Now, that was a weird game. Buffalo got up 21-0 pretty much immediately, so the Lions offense was basically forced to do nothing but pass. But when they did try to run it, they were unsuccessful against this Buffalo defense. So the Bills' run defense, yeah, they got ran all over by Baltimore early in the season, but as of late, they've done a much better job. That includes last week on Wildcard Weekend against the Broncos. Now, last week, Denver was able to run the ball on the Bills a little bit. I mean, they only had 79 rushing yards in the game, 79, but 4.6 yards per carry, success rate up close to 43%. These aren't excellent rushing numbers, obviously 79 rushing yards, but it's a little concerning to see that 4.6 yards per carry allowed, 42.9% success rate. What's even more concerning is Bo Nix did a lot of the running. In case you're unfamiliar with the Ravens, they have a pretty athletic quarterback in Lamar Jackson, so they just struggled with Bo Nix' athleticism last week. Enter Lamar Jackson, and the Ravens haven't slowed down at all when it comes to running the ball. In fact, last week against Pittsburgh, they bulldozed the Steelers' defensive front. They had 299 rushing yards in the game, 6 yards per carry, success rate per rush over 52%. They had no problems at all running the ball in the Steelers defense. I will say the Steelers, I mean, every aspect of the Steelers team, defense, offense, every aspect of it was pretty awful down the stretch of this season. I mean, that they were a straight up bad football team. They have been for a month and a half, but still, almost 300 yards rushing on the Steelers defense. So as of right now, it's looking like there's no way Buffalo's able to stop this Ravens run game, and I think that's a pretty fair statement. That being said, something we do need to point out here, since week 14, and that includes wildcard weekend last week, the Bills lead the NFL in EPA per rush defensively, meaning yeah, you can run the ball on the Bills, but they do not let you turn it into points, whether it's a sack, whether it's a penalty. You'll be able to run the ball in Buffalo and get down the field, but this defense will find a way to keep you from putting points on the board. I mean, first in the NFL in EPA per rush defensively. So Baltimore's going to be able to run the ball in this Buffalo defense, but are they able to consistently turn those runs into points? We'll have to wait and see. Now, when it comes to Lamar Jackson, you're not going to find many negative matchups. I mean, his numbers look pretty excellent against everything, and the Bills defense is pretty balanced. I mean, they run a decent amount of zone coverage, a decent amount of cover too, so we can take a look at the splits. But I mean, when it comes to Lamar Jackson, he's going to have excellent numbers against everything. He's got great numbers against man coverage. He's got great numbers against zone coverage. Shocker, he's got great numbers against cover two as well. First in yards per attempt, second in passer rating. So it's tough to find splits when it comes to Lamar Jackson this year. He's been pretty excellent against everything. Week 4 against the Bills, he actually didn't do much in terms of yardage. 156 pass yards, 54 rushing yards, 3 total touchdowns in the game. Just 210 total yards for Lamar, which is obviously a lot less than we're used to seeing. The story of that game was Derrick Henry. 199 yards on the ground, 8.3 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns in the game, including, I think he had an 87-yarder in that one. So it was really Derrick Henry that racking up all the yards, not so much Lamar Jackson. But what you absolutely love in this game if you're betting the Bills is right here. That week 4 game was on the road in Baltimore. This one's at home in Buffalo, and this Bills defense has been light years better against the pass at home. It's actually not even close. On the road, they're allowing over 282 passing yards per game. At home, 194. Yards per pass to them goes from 8.2 to 5.9. We're talking about night and day difference here. The Bills' pass defense on the road versus at home. We just saw Bo Nix, who, by the way, had been playing really well. He went on the road into Buffalo and was held to 144 yards passing in the game. Now, a 93.7 passer rating isn't even terrible. It's not like Bo Nix was absolutely terrible in the game, but the story is right here, and that's just the story with this Buffalo defense. 3 of 12. On 3rd and 4th down conversions. McDermott just knows how to get his defense off the field. And I know McDermott doesn't call the defensive plays anymore. He stopped last year. But this Buffalo Bills defense just knows how to draw something up to make a huge play and stall the drive. That's what Buffalo's defense always seems to do. It's the type of defense where you watch the game and you look at the box score and you're like, the Bills defense didn't even play that well in this game. Final score was 40-13. They just know how to make the big play to put a stop to the drive. Keep in mind, we're still talking about a Ravens offense that's most likely going to be missing Zay Flowers again. He's listed as doubtful. And this Buffalo defense is at full strength. Everyone good to go on the Bills defense. Look, by no means will you ever hear me say this Baltimore offense is going to get stopped or shut down, but I think this Buffalo defense can make some plays. I think they're a lot better than the raw data indicates, and I think they're able to hold Baltimore to some field goals and keep them from absolutely lighting it up like Baltimore's offense always seems to do. I like the Bills defense to make some plays in this one. Now, what about the matchup on the other side of the ball? We got the Buffalo offense against the Baltimore defense, and this is a hell of a matchup here. Buffalo offensively 6th in yards per play, 7th in success rate. The Baltimore defense 5th and 2nd. I want to give either side a particular edge here between the Bills offense and the Ravens defense. Buffalo's coming off a hell of an offensive performance last week against Denver. Over 470 yards in the game, 6.5 yards per play, success rate over 55%, which was the best in the NFL last week. No offense was more successful than the Buffalo offense last week against Denver, and this is the defense they did it on. The Broncos defense, 2nd in yards per play, 3rd in success rate. That's who Buffalo had a 55.6% success rate against in a playoff game. One of the best defenses in the NFL. Now, I think we all agree that the Denver defense was a little bit overrated, but this is still an excellent defense, and Buffalo made them look kind of silly. That being said, we do not want to sleep on this Baltimore Ravens defense. They really turned it on in the second half of the season. First half of the season, it was looking pretty shaky for the Ravens defense. 25.3 points per game, 6.4 yards per play, success rate over 47%. But in the second half of the season, we see the points per game drop to 15.4, 5.1 yards per play, success rate down at 41%. Night and day difference here. This Ravens defense really figured their shit out about halfway through the season. Last week against Pittsburgh, they played well, although Pittsburgh did average 6.2 yards per play in the game, which is actually good. If you average 6.2 yards per play on the season, you would have been the second best offense in the NFL. So the Steelers were making some plays and moving the ball a little bit. 37.8% success rate isn't all that great, but it's not terrible. So Baltimore's defensive performance last week against the Steelers offense, definitely not as impressive as the Bills offense was. I mean, the Bills lit it up against a very good defense. Baltimore had this against the Steelers offense, which has pretty much been trash for a month and a half now. One thing we do have to point out, though, Buffalo was unable to run the ball on this Ravens defense back in week 4. That was on the road in Baltimore, just 81 rushing yards in the game, 3.5 yards per carry. Now, both of these units were in a much different place back in week 4 than they are now, than they were in the second half of the year. For example, the Bills' run game really got going about halfway through the season, and the Ravens' run defense first half of the season was the best in the NFL. They were a little more vulnerable to the run of the second half of the season. So I'm not sure how much I take away from this data point right here all the way back in week 4. I don't think it's very relevant. In the second half of the season, the only run game that the Ravens saw that I would put on Buffalo's level is Philadelphia, and that game was also on the road out in Philly. 4.6 yards per carry, 142 rushing yards in the game, over 45% success rate per rush. So the last time the Ravens went on the road and saw a run game of this caliber, they struggled to stop it. The Eagles were able to run the ball in Baltimore. This Buffalo offensive line is definitely not a pushover. They're 7th in adjusted line yards, 17th in run blocking grade, 16th in yards before contact. Gonna be a good matchup on the line of scrimmage against this Baltimore defensive front. And speaking of the Baltimore defensive front, here's an area where I give the edge to Buffalo. The pass protection. The Bills' pass protection has been pretty great this year. They're 5th in pass blocking grade, 1st in adjusted sack rate. Baltimore's pass rush, not that it's bad, but it's definitely not an elite pass rush. So Josh Allen should definitely have some clean pockets to throw from in this one. He's 8th in yards per pass attempt, 5th in pass rating when given a clean pocket. I mean, he's also 1st to pressure to sack rate, so good luck trying to get him to the ground. I mean, Denver's 1st in adjusted sack rate on the defensive side. They did get him to the ground twice. Baltimore's pass rush, not nearly on the same level as the Broncos and their blitz packages. So Baltimore should definitely struggle to generate consistent pressure on Josh Allen in this one, which should open up some opportunities to make some big plays downfield. Now, these numbers right here need to be taken with a grain of salt. The Ravens are 28th in defensive efficiency against the deep pass. Josh Allen loves to throw the ball downfield. 15.1% of his pass attempts are deep passes. He's great at it. This should be a huge mismatch according to this graphic. Here's the problem with that. A lot of the damage done to the Ravens defense via the deep pass, it was done in the first half of the season. I mean, weeks 1 through 10, they were allowing over 314 passing yards per game. Since week 11, it hasn't been anything close to that. So I'm not saying the Ravens defense isn't susceptible to the downfield throws. They are a little bit, but I mean, they're not 28th in defensive efficiency against the deep pass. Those numbers are skewed based on what was happening earlier in the year. And let's not act like this is a completely perfect matchup for Josh Allen. I mean, Baltimore runs a lot of single high safety looks. Since since week 12, over 61% frequency, 6th most in the NFL. Josh Allen definitely more successful against two high safeties, 7th in yards per attempt, 7th in passer rating. Against single high safety, 17th and 14th. So there's something if you're trying to back Baltimore's defense here. Also, the Ravens have been running a lot more cover 2, over 21% frequency since week 10, 6th most in the NFL. Josh Allen has actually really struggled against cover 2 this year. 35th in completion percentage, 8th in yards per attempt, 26th in passer rating. Now we're only talking about what, 21% of the defensive snaps are in cover 2. But still, the point I'm making is it's not an absolutely perfect matchup for Josh Allen. Baltimore's definitely equipped to give him some problems, but honestly, I just can't see this offense being stopped, especially at home. I think they can run the ball on anybody. I think Josh Allen can connect on big throws on anybody. So I like the Bills offense to score, but it's not a fade of the Ravens defense. It's solely me backing the Bills offense, which brings us to the bets. So what am I doing in this game? Well, to be honest, when I first saw the line move from Buffalo -1.5 to Buffalo +1, Buffalo +1.5, I disagreed with the movement. I knew I was going to be taking Buffalo. I thought that was a little ridiculous to have the Bills catching points at home. After looking at the matchup, I do understand why Baltimore would be laying one here. I do get the line. I'm still going to be taking Buffalo. Like I said earlier, the Ravens should be able to run the ball just fine in this game. I think Buffalo's able to run the ball right back. And when it comes to passing attacks, I mean, with no Zay Flowers, you got to give the slight edge to the Bills. And on defense, honestly, we look at the numbers and you would think Baltimore elite defense, Buffalo a little bit of a shaky defense. That's not exactly how I feel about these two defenses. Like I said, I mean, Buffalo just always seems to find a way to get off the field. I think Buffalo's defense is a lot better than the numbers indicate. So I think the gap between the defenses isn't nearly as big as you would think, which is why Buffalo at home is a dog. I'm on the Bills here. I also think it goes over the total, but I haven't bet that yet. Give me Buffalo +1.5. We'll talk about it on the live show, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Me, Toast, Beaver, and Steve from Just a Bet Outside. That's 11 a.m. Eastern time. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see you in the comments. Let's have ourselves a good one. I'm going for 5 straight winning days. Let's keep it going. Please remember to bet responsibly. Hit me up in the Discord if you need me.